The Galactic Council chamber, a vast hall of shimmering light and weightless projections, hummed with debate. Delegates from dozens of star systems floated in their assigned sectors, their holographic data streams flickering in midair. At the center of the assembly, High Speaker Xylan, a being of elongated crystalline form, gestured with a fractal limb, his voice resonating across the chamber. We must consider the implications of human integration into the galactic community. Their history is saturated with war, yet recent observations suggest they are. Xylan hesitated, as if struggling to find a word fitting for such an odd species. Predictably timid when faced with superior force. A murmur rippled through the delegates. The tall, insectoid representative of the Zarth Dominion clicked his mandibles in agreement. Yes, they hesitate before conflict. When the Zorth demanded their submission, they did not rally their fleets, nor issue threats. They sent diplomats. His tone dripped with disdain. Ambassador Tiarkhan of the Vrake, a species known for their measured neutrality, shifted in his graphpod. Perhaps they are pragmatic rather than weak, he mused, his deep-set eyes narrowing. Or perhaps we misunderstand them. The chamber dimmed as a new projection materialized, a live transmission from the outer rim. The Zorth Dominion had issued an ultimatum. Humanity was to relinquish its frontier colonies or face annihilation. The broadcast had been received on Earth days prior, and now the Galactic Council awaited humanity's reply. The feed crackled, and the image of a man resolved into view. He stood in what appeared to be an old-fashioned wooden barn, sunlight slanting through the beams. A battered rifle leaned against the wall beside him. He wore a simple, dust-streaked shirt with sleeves rolled up over muscled forearms, his expression calm but unreadable. "My name's Jacob Callahan," he said, the words slow and deliberate. "I run cattle on New Appalachia, one of those colonies you're talking about." He wiped his hands on a rag, seemingly unfazed by the enormity of the moment. "Now, I understand the Zorth think we'll roll over and give up our land." He exhaled, gaze steady. "That won't be happening." Xylan's crystalline frame flickered, his form betraying surprise. "This is the official response." Another voice, softer but firm, joined in. "You're speaking to the Farmers Marines." The camera panned slightly to reveal a woman, lean and sun-weathered, her hair tied back in a practical knot. "Name's Sergeant Elena Vasquez. We were soldiers once. Then we put down roots, built something worth protecting. The Zorth think we're easy pickings because we grow food instead of fight wars." She leaned forward. "They'll find out real soon how wrong they are." The transmission ended. Silence gripped the council chamber. Xylan was the first to recover. "This is folly. They lack warships, planetary shields." "They have numbers," Tiarkhan interjected. His eyes, dark pools of thought, studied the frozen image of Callahan. "And they have something even more dangerous, conviction." The Zorth did not wait long to test that conviction. Within a week, their forces descended upon the outer colonies. The first assault came at dawn, targeting New Appalachia. A fleet of sleek, black warships blotted out the sky, raining plasma upon the fields below. By all logic, the colony should have burned. But as the Zorth troops advanced, expecting no resistance, they were met not with frightened civilians, but with a wall of firepower. Farmers, ranchers, and homesteaders emerged from the dust, wielding weapons that should have been relics, modified railguns, repurposed harvester mechs, and makeshift artillery crafted from industrial equipment. The first wave of Zorth warriors, confident in their superiority, charged the human defenses. They did not expect the land itself to fight back. Fields had been laced with explosive charges, irrigation lines converted into flamethrowers. Crop duster drones, retrofitted to drop makeshift bombs, screeched overhead. And leading the charge was Callahan, his rifle kicking against his shoulder as he fired. Vasquez was at his side, issuing orders through a cracked comm link, her voice calm despite the chaos. The battle raged for hours. When the dust settled, The Zorth warships still hung in the sky, but the ground forces had been routed. The invaders, used to breaking worlds with ease, had been driven back by people who had once spent their days herding cattle and harvesting wheat. News of the battle spread faster than light. The Galactic Council reconvened, their once dismissive tones now laced with unease. Footage of the fight played in the chamber. Callahan, his face streaked with soot, reloading with the ease of a man who had done this before. Vasquez barking commands, her squad moving with military precision. Xylan's form flickered erratically. Impossible. Tiarkhan's expression was unreadable. You assumed war was something they feared. He gestured to the screen. But tell me, Speaker, does that look like fear to you? The Zorth did not retreat for long. Humiliation festered in the Dominion's high command, and their response was swift. Within days, a second fleet arrived, larger, heavier, and with orders to burn New Appalachia to its foundations. The Galactic Council watched from a distance, unwilling to intervene in what they had deemed a lost cause. Some expected humanity to surrender now that the scale of the invasion had become clear. Others, like Tiarkhan, waited with a quiet, uneasy curiosity. The Zorth landed in coordinated waves, fanning out across the plains in formations that had crushed lesser species before. They swept into the remnants of the first battlefield, expecting scattered resistance at best. Instead, they found empty trenches, abandoned vehicles, and eerily quiet farmsteads. Their commanders barked orders, pushing forward, their armored ranks moving deeper into the colony's outskirts. Then the earth split open beneath them. A Zorth walker, bristling with plasma cannons, took a single step forward before the ground collapsed in a controlled detonation, sending the towering machine tumbling into a chasm lined with sharpened rebar and explosive charges. Entire regiments found themselves funneled into invisible kill zones. Plasma fire rained down from hidden outposts. Tripwires set off cascades of destruction, and irrigation tunnels concealed ambush squads who struck before vanishing into the dust. In the heart of it all, Callahan moved like a ghost, his rifle slung across his back as he studied a handheld scanner. We've got movement east, 3 heavy units, infantry support. Looks like they're trying to flank. Vasquez crouched beside him, adjusting her comms. Then we bleed them dry before they get there. She switched frequencies, relaying coordinates to a nearby crew. Minutes later, a repurposed grain silo on the horizon erupted, sending fire and shrapnel into the advancing Zorth ranks. Tiarkhan, embedded with the farmers' marines against the Council's orders, observed the battle firsthand. His species had studied war for centuries, but this was something different. Humanity did not fight with the precision of a trained army, nor with the cold efficiency of machines. They fought with instinct, with desperation honed into something lethal. Every field, every structure, every scrap of land was a weapon in their hands. The Zorth commander, infuriated by the lack of progress, finally deployed his trump card, a mobile fortress, a towering behemoth of alien engineering that bristled with enough firepower to level a city. It advanced unchallenged, its shields repelling scattered fire. The Zorth inside relaxed, confident that their enemies would soon be reduced to ash. Then the farmers' marines sent the cattle. From the western ridge, a massive herd of stampeding livestock burst forth, their hooves churning up dust and soil as they charged straight for the Zorth lines. At first, the invaders scoffed until they realized what was driving the herd. Behind them, a series of repurposed harvester mechs lumbered forward, herding the terrified animals with shock prods and sonic pulses. The sheer force of the stampede slammed into the Zorth flank, scattering infantry and toppling light vehicles. In the chaos, human snipers and assault teams surged forward, cutting down disoriented survivors. Inside the fortress, alarms blared. The Zorth commander sneered at the primitive tactics, barking orders to recalibrate shields and prepare for a counterstrike. His confidence held until his sensors picked up a new anomaly: heat signatures beneath the fortress, deep underground. Vasquez grinned as she flicked the detonator. A buried network of old mining charges, placed beneath the very soil the Zorth had claimed as theirs, erupted in a cascade of explosions. The fortress groaned as its supports gave way, its once impenetrable structure tilting at an impossible angle. Inside, Zorth officers scrambled for control, but it was too late. The massive war machine collapsed into the ruined earth, consumed by its own weight. The battle was over before the last fires had burned out. When the transmission reached the Galactic Council, silence stretched across the chamber. The footage of Zorth corpses sprawled across wheat fields, of human farmers with rifles slung over their backs, of Callahan lighting a cigarette against the backdrop of a burning war machine. None of it aligned with the Council's expectations. Xylan's voice was strained when he finally spoke. "This cannot be sustainable." Tiarchon's gaze never left the screen. "Then why are the Zorth the ones retreating?" The Zorth Dominion did not take defeat lightly. Their warlords convened in darkened chambers of obsidian and steel, voices hissing through the air like blades drawn from their sheaths. The loss at New Appalachia was an insult, one that could not be ignored. They had underestimated the humans, mistaking them for a lesser species, simply because they did not conquer as others did. That mistake would not be repeated. Days later, the skies over New Appalachia darkened again, not with ships, but with something far worse. The Dominion had deployed a planetary siege engine, a monolithic construct that orbited high above, casting the land in an unnatural twilight. From its underbelly, a series of metallic pods rained down, embedding themselves deep in the soil. At first, there was only silence. Then the ground quaked, and something began to spread, thick, black vines of synthetic origin, creeping outward like a living thing. Wherever they touched, the land withered, crops crumbling into dust, rivers thickening into sludge. The Zorth had found a way to poison the very thing the farmers' marines fought for. In the command center, Callahan watched the destruction unfold on the holoscreen, his jaw tight. "They can't beat us in a fight, so they're starving us out." Vasquez exhaled sharply. "Then we take the fight to them." Tiarchon, standing in the corner, studied the display. His people had always believed war belonged to the strong, to the advanced, to those who wielded superior technology. But watching the humans, he realized they had grasped something far older, something deeper. War was not about weapons or machines, it was about will. And humanity's had not been broken. Callahan turned to the gathered fighters. "We've been holding the line too long. It's time we remind the Zorth that we're not just defending. We're winning." The plan was reckless. It was, by all strategic calculations, suicidal. And yet no one hesitated. They had stolen a Zorth transport during the last battle, repaired its systems, and now, with a skeleton crew, they would pilot it straight toward the siege engine in orbit. Their goal was simple: take control of the station, disable its planetary weapon, and show the Zorth that humanity would not kneel. As the stolen ship ascended, breaking through the atmosphere, Callahan stood in the cockpit, watching the stars stretch before him. It had been years since he had last been in space, years since he had worn anything but dust-streaked work clothes. Now, clad in repurposed body armor, rifle strapped across his chest, he felt something he had long since buried stir within him. Not fear, not anger, purpose. The siege engine loomed ahead, a fortress in the void, its surface bristling with automated defenses. But the farmers' marines did not rely on direct assaults. As they approached, Vasquez worked the stolen ship systems, mimicking an emergency docking request. When the station's bay doors slid open, they struck. They moved through the corridors like phantoms, striking before alarms could blare, taking down Zorth guards with brutal efficiency. These were not elite soldiers, not trained commandos. These were farmers, engineers, people who had spent their lives working with their hands, who understood leverage, pressure points, weak spots. They fought with the same precision they used to mend machinery, to break a wild horse, to harvest a field before the storm hit. By the time the Zorth realized the station had been breached, it was too late. Callahan led the final push into the control center, his rifle kicking against his shoulder as he dropped the last guard. He stepped over the body, moving to the main console, fingers hovering over the controls. One command would disable the planetary weapon. Another would turn it against the Zorth fleet still lurking on the edges of the system. Vasquez joined him, glancing at the screen. "So, what's it going to be?" For a long moment, Callahan said nothing. He had never wanted war. None of them had. But the Zorth had come to their land, had burned their homes, had tried to break them. And now, here in the heart of enemy territory, with the fate of an entire world resting on his decision, he knew there was only one answer. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the weapon, not to destroy, but to send a message. Energy surged through the station, a pulse of raw power directed outward into space. The Zorth ships, sensing a catastrophic overload, began to scatter. Some fled the system entirely. Others hesitated, their commanders unsure of what had just happened. But in the end, it did not matter. The message had been received. The siege engine was silent. The land below, though wounded, would heal. The Zorth, once so sure of their dominion, had seen what happened when humanity was pushed too far. Hours later, as the dust settled, the Galactic Council received the final transmission. Callahan stood before the camera, his face worn but unwavering. "We didn't ask for this fight," he said, "but we finished it." The council chamber, once filled with voices dismissing humanity as fragile, was now silent. Even Xylan had no words. Tiarkhan leaned forward, his voice a quiet murmur. "They are not warriors by nature," he exhaled. "But when forced to be, they are something far worse." The stars burned cold and distant above New Appalachia, but the ground beneath was alive. Fires still smoldered in the wreckage of downed Zorth war machines, and the scent of scorched earth mingled with the sharper tang of ozone from spent plasma rounds. The battle had ended, yet no one among the farmers' marines allowed themselves to relax. War was not a thing that disappeared overnight. It lingered, settled into the bones of the land, took root in the minds of those who had fought it. Jacob Callahan stood at the edge of a ruined wheat field, boot heels pressing into blackened soil. This had been good land once. It would be again, but not yet. He let out a slow breath, watching as Vasquez walked toward him from the newly constructed command post. She moved like someone who had been running for too long but still refused to stop. "The council sent word," she said, brushing stray strands of hair from her face. "They're finally stepping in, calling this a violation of interstellar law. Zorth are being pulled back." She snorted. A little late for that. Callahan didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the horizon, where the last Zorth transport ships were lifting off, dark shapes against the dawn sky. "They're leaving because they lost," he murmured. "Not because the council told them to." Vasquez crossed her arms, watching the ships vanish into the atmosphere. "You think they'll be back?" "They always come back," he said. A few feet away, Ambassador Tiarkhan observed the exchange, his expression unreadable. He had remained on New Appalachia after the battle, not as an official envoy, but as something else. A witness, perhaps, or a student. The Galactic Council had long believed that true power lay in diplomacy, in reasoned negotiation, in carefully balanced treaties. The humans had shown him something else entirely. Power was knowing when to plant roots and when to tear them up. He stepped forward. "The Council will not forget this," he said, his voice measured. "Humanity's place in the galactic order has changed." Callahan finally turned, his gaze steady. "Not our place. Just how you see us." Tiarkhan inclined his head slightly, conceding the point. Further down the hill, the farmers' marines moved among the wreckage, salvaging what they could. They worked in near silence, their hands familiar with the task. They had done this before, after storms, after droughts, after disasters that had threatened to take everything from them. This was no different. A young recruit, barely more than a boy, stood beside the burned-out husk of a Zorth walker. His rifle hung loosely at his side, forgotten for the moment. He turned to an older fighter beside him. "We won," he said, voice uncertain, as if the words didn't quite fit. The older man, scarred, weathered, his uniform patched more times than it was whole, let out a short, dry chuckle. "Yeah, kid. We won." He gestured at the ruined land. "Now comes the hard part." The boy frowned. "What's harder than fighting?" The older man sighed, gripping a handful of blackened soil, letting it crumble between his fingers. "Making sure we never have to fight again." The sky brightened as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The land was wounded, but not broken. It would heal. So would they. Eventually, Callahan turned back toward the settlement, toward the work still to be done. "Come on," he said. "Days wasting." And just like that, the farmers' marines got back to work. Months passed, and the scars of war began to fade, but they never truly disappeared. The land healed slowly, crops returning where fire and poison had once claimed the soil. The rivers ran clear again, and the sky no longer carried the unnatural weight of Zorth war machines. Yet even as New Appalachia rebuilt, the people remained wary. No one believed this was the end. Jacob Callahan stood on his porch, watching the wind roll through the fields. They had replanted, but the new crops stood shorter than they should have. The land remembered what had been done to it, just as the people did. He took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth chase away the morning chill, when he heard the distant growl of an approaching transport. Vasquez stepped onto the porch beside him, arms crossed. "That the ambassador again?" Callahan didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowing as the sleek council vessel cut through the sky. "Looks like it." The ship landed just outside the main settlement, kicking up a cloud of dust. Tiarkhan emerged first, his long coat billowing slightly in the wind. He carried himself as he always did, calm, composed, unreadable. But Callahan had learned to recognize the subtle shifts in the alien's posture. Tiarkhan was not just here as an observer. This was something more. "We expected you sooner," Callahan said as the ambassador approached. Tiarkhan inclined his head. "There were discussions." Vasquez snorted. "Bet there were." Tiarkhan exhaled, his version of a sigh. "The council has ruled in favor of formal human representation. You are no longer merely tolerated in the galactic community. You are acknowledged." Callahan took another sip of coffee. "That right?" Tiarkhan's eyes flickered toward the fields, toward the people working, repairing, rebuilding. The Zorth have been sanctioned for their actions here, forced to withdraw from all contested colonies. But they are not the only ones watching. Vasquez's expression darkened. "You mean the rest of the galaxy just realized we aren't easy targets?" Tiarkhan met her gaze. "Yes." Callahan set his mug down on the porch railing, studying the ambassador. "You didn't come all this way just to tell us that." Tiarkhan hesitated. For the first time since they had met, he looked uncertain. "There are some who believe humanity should be left alone, that your people are best kept at a distance. But others see what I see." "And what's that?" Tiarkhan's voice was quiet. "A species that does not seek war, but does not fear it either." The words hung in the air. Callahan looked out at the fields again, at the land they had fought for, bled for. He had never wanted to be a soldier again. None of them had. But war had come to them anyway. And now the rest of the galaxy knew what happened when humanity was backed into a corner. Vasquez folded her arms. "So what happens next?" Tiarkhan's expression was unreadable. "That depends." Callahan picked up his coffee again, took a slow sip. "On what?" Tiarkhan met his gaze. "On whether you're ready for what comes next." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of tilled earth and the distant hum of machinery. The war was over. For now. But Callahan had spent his life reading the land, understanding the signs before a storm came rolling in. And if he was right, another storm was already on the horizon.